I had a week of use it or lose it vacation time at work and decided to use it. I was a recent college grad still wet behind the ears, working in a low-status job as an editor at a high-status company in Silicon Valley. I had no significant other or close friends in town, so I decided to take a solo road trip down US 101 and see a part of California that wasn't covered by little boxes on the hillside. My first stop was my last. I decided to take a short detour from the freeway to visit the Sarah Tilley House, an architectural marvel or monstrosity built in the 1890s by an eccentric rich widow. It had hundreds of rooms connected by winding stairs, hidden passages, concealed doors, and dead-end hallways, and was said to be haunted by the ghost of its builder. A few rooms were available for paying guests, and the architecture was so remarkable that I decided to spend a night there if I could. The public entrance led into a handsome oak-paneled lobby with a marble service counter, behind which stood a tall, attractive woman in her 30s. She was dressed in a style that I took to be of the house's era, a tightly tailored bodice, leg of mutton sleeves and a toe-length skirt that belled out from the hips, all in lavender silk. Petticoats whispered as she moved. She wore her brunette hair in a bun and back, with curled bangs across her forehead. She introduced herself as Miss Sarah Tilley and asked how she could help me. I asked if a room was available for the night. It seemed I was in luck, she just had a cancellation. As she ran my credit card, I asked, "Is that your real name, or are you just playing a role?" "It's my real name," she said. "My great-great-grandmother built this house. That's her portrait on the wall. My mother, grandmother and great-grandmother were all named after her, and so am I. If I were male, I'd be called Sarah Eunice Tilley V. You seem to be dressed the way Sarah Eunice I dressed," I said. This is actually a copy of one of her dresses from the gay 90s, while she was building the house. "It's a flattering style," I said, to be polite. "Do you think so?" Most people think it looks bulky and awkward, but actually it's quite comfortable, even with the corset and petticoats. You find a corset comfortable? Of course. It's a myth that corsets were cruel. A well-made corset embraces your body, it doesn't crush it. Once it molds to your figure, it's the foundation for everything you wear, your most important and intimate garment. "Oh," I said, a bit embarrassed by the turn the conversation had taken. Descending an ornately carved oak staircase, a young woman entered the lobby. She, too, wore an 1890s outfit, a maid's uniform, with a bodice and long skirt in black cotton, a white ruffled headband and a long white bib apron decorated with tucks and ruffles. She curtsied to Ms. Tilley. "Excuse me, ma'am, but would you or your guest care for tea?" Ms. Tilley looked at me. "Mr. 6 Cent Mihaly," I said. "Laszlo 6 Cent Mihaly. It's a Transylvanian name." "Goodness gracious. You speak English so well." "That's because I was born in Chicago," I said. "I've never been to Transylvania." "Oh. Do you mind if I just call you Mr. Laszlo?" "Not at all," I said. "No tea for me, thanks. I'll have wine with dinner." "Thank you, Abby," Ms. Tilley said. "Yes, Ms. Tilley," Abby said with another curtsy, and left the lobby through a door labeled staff only. "That's an attractive costume," I said. "Yes, guests just love the old-fashioned maid's uniforms," she said. "Especially men. It's practically fetish clothing." "Would you say so? Long skirt, long sleeves, buttoned up to the chin? It's even more modest than the dress you're wearing." "What's the difference? The apron? The lack of color?" "No, Mr. Laszlo. The difference is power. Maids are servants. Maids are inferior to guests and call them sir and ma'am, and obey their orders with a curtsy. It's totally unequal, like the social classes were when this house was built. But surely people don't treat them as a lower class of people nowadays? You'd be surprised. Some of the maids, of course, enjoy it." "Enjoy being humiliated?" The thought made me slightly stiff. "Oh, yes, Mr. Laszlo. They enjoy the entire experience. The underclothing, chemise, drawers, corset cover and petticoats. The bodice and long skirt. The apron and headband. The feeling of submission, of having to obey orders, of having to do housework. Some of them love having to curtsy all the time. I swallowed. I was fully stiff now. Why? I had no desire to be a maid. That's hard to imagine, I said. Is it? Ask one of them. Look, Mr. Laszlo, I happen to have a free evening. Would you care to join me for dinner in our restaurant? My treat. I'd be happy to, but surely you don't dine with all your guests. No, but I have a feeling you're the kind of guest that our ghost might visit. I laughed. You really have a ghost? I'll tell you over dinner. In a private corner of the dining room, Miss Tilly's maids served us a scrumptious meal. Sliced pork tenderloin, freshly baked rosemary sourdough bread, sautéed green beans with slivered almonds, and mango sorbet drizzled with balsamic vinegar. I must admit that I openly ogled the maids as they worked. They didn't seem to mind. Their skirts and petticoats made a luscious frou-frou sound as they served and removed the dishes. Unlike Ms. Tilly's floor-length skirt, their skirts barely hid their ankles and occasionally gave me a glimpse of white petticoats. You seem very interested in my staff, she said. Or at least in what they're wearing. Oh, no, I said hurriedly. I was just thinking that it must be strange for modern women to live this way. To have to get up and put on all that clothing, a corset and petticoats and a long dress and apron, and smile and curtsy and obey orders all day, every day. Like maids must have done when this house was built. I assure you, our maids lead vastly better lives than servants did when this house was built. She smiled. I could arrange for you to be a maid for a day, Mr. Laszlo. You could even wear the uniform. What made her think I wanted to be a maid? No, thank you, I said. It, just must be odd for them. You mentioned a ghost? Yes, she said. The ghost of Miss Sarah Tilly the First sometimes appears to male guests in their rooms at night. A ghost? What does it look like? As a rule, I don't spend time in male guests' rooms at night, but I've glimpsed it once or twice. It's unnerving. A glowing figure of bluish light. Why only male guests? We don't know, she said. Miss Tilly died at a man's hands, so it's possible she wants revenge. You mean, by killing them? No. Something more humiliating. Oh, come on. You don't really believe in ghosts, do you? I only know what guests tell me. Their stories are remarkably consistent. The men she visits are all the same physical type, short and slender, with delicate features. Men like you, Mr. Laszlo, if you don't mind my saying. I did mind. I was sensitive about my size. What does she do to them? She offers them their deepest desire. What so if I want a new $10 law, the ghost will give me one? A man's deepest desire is never material, Mr. Laszlo. Most men desire more than anything to love and serve a woman. Miss Tilly's ghost makes men desperate to love and serve her. What kind of man wants love from a ghost? A man who wants to serve her. How can a man serve a ghost? I imagine that depends on what the ghost wants. After dinner, I fetched my suitcase from the car. Miss Tilly escorted me to a large, luxurious bedroom with its own bathroom. There was no closet, just a big mahogany armoire. After she left, I looked around for anything that might be used to create a ghostly apparition. I found nothing you wouldn't expect to see in an 1890s bedroom, except for electrical outlets and lights. The maid left a chocolate truffle on the pillow, so I popped it into my mouth. Whoa! I preferred dark chocolate, but this was intense, at least 80% cacao. I usually slept nude, so I stripped, got my dwindly reader, climbed into bed, turned off the bedside lamp and read about 10 backlit pages of Northanger Abbey before dropping off. I awoke sometime in the middle of the night. I felt a momentary puff of air from where the door and window were closed. Wisps of light appeared at the foot of my bed, a blue aura that coalesced from thin air into the figure of a woman. A woman painted in light, shimmering in the dark. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress like Ms. Tilly. She looked like Ms. Tilly, too. How? A hologram? I sat up sharply and looked more closely. The figure resembled Miss Tilly, but wasn't her. A little shorter. Longer and darker hair, done up on top of her head. Different bangs. A different dress, in shimmering silver satin. A different face, slightly plumper. Like the portrait in the lobby. What appeared to be the ghost of Miss Sarah Eunice Tilly the first looked down at me. "Lisa," she said in an eerie, hollow voice completely unlike Ms. Tilly's. "Get up." I was scared now. What the hell? "Ms. Tilly, is that you? What's going on?" The figure ignored my words. "You are immodest, Lisa," it said. "Get up." I wasn't sure I could trust my eyes. I slowly got out of bed on the side nearest the door into the hallway, ready to flee if necessary. I looked around for the clothes I'd tossed onto a chair a few hours ago. They were gone. My phone, wallet, and keys were stacked neatly in their place. The figure moved between me and the door, and that's when I got the shock of my life. Miss, not Ms. Tilly's ghost was floating 2 or 3 inches above the floor. The tips of her black leather shoes showed below the hem of her dress, but they touched only air. She drifted to the armoire against the wall, opened it. I saw her glowing fingers grip the handle and reached inside. She pulled out a folded white garment and drifted towards me. "Put this on, Lisa." She thrust the garment at me. Her hands brushed mine. I felt a freezing chill where she touched me. I abruptly backed away and dropped the garment. A Victorian nightgown, from the looks of it, with pin tucks and lace trim. "Pick it up, Lisa," she said. I couldn't believe what was happening. A ghost in my room opening furniture and carrying material things? Telling me to put on a nightgown? Was it actually a ghost? No. Or Ms. Tilly herself in disguise? A projection of some sort. I reached out to touch her shoulder. Instead of coming into contact with a physical body, my hand passed through her, as if she were an optical illusion. Bone-chilling cold sliced through my hand and wrist. I shrieked in pain and surprise and yanked my hand away from her. The pain ended immediately. I flexed my fingers. The hand seemed undamaged. "Put on your chemise, Lisa," the ghost said. I felt sudden shame at my nudity, and hastily picked up the nightgown, or chemise as she called it. I let it slide down my arms and over my body. It was pure white cotton and extremely soft. It had tiny cap sleeves, with narrow lace trim around the neckline and hem, and fell just past my knees. A girl's garment. "Now you are modest, Lisa," the ghost said. "Go back to sleep." It faded away and vanished. Not instantly, it took about a second to disappear. The room was empty. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. And what I'd seen and felt was impossible. "Miss Tilly?" I said. No answer. I turned on the lights and searched the room, and saw nothing to explain what I'd just witnessed. Instead, a new mystery: all the clothes in my suitcase were missing as well. I checked the drawers of the armoire, but they were empty now. I checked my wallet. I always carried some cash. It was all there. Nothing missing but my clothes. Seriously freaked out, I climbed back into bed, turned out the light and lay there until morning, watching patterns dance on the inside of my eyelids and wondering what had just happened. Was it all a hallucination? If so, why was I wearing this chemise? I rose early and searched the room again, but my clothes were gone. I had nothing to wear but the chemise. It made me look ridiculous, but at least I was decent. I tiptoed in my bare feet down to the lobby, hoping to find Miss Tilly, the modern version of her, not whatever or whoever I saw last night. She was there, behind the counter, wearing another Victorian dress. "Love your nightie, Mr. Laszlo," she said, smiling. I blushed. "Can I talk to you in private?" She led me into an office behind the counter, where I told her what had happened to me and my clothes. She didn't seem surprised. "Did her heels click when she walked?" she asked. "She didn't walk," I said. I held my thumb and fingers 2 or 3 inches apart. She floated about that far off the ground. "Right. That's what the others all say, she said. Well, congratulations. You've been visited by Miss Tilly's ghost. I couldn't believe she really thought that. There's no such thing as ghosts. You must have done it somehow. Special effects. Holograms, or lasers, or something. Sorry, no, she said. The most advanced technology in this house is electric lighting. Whatever you saw was real. You're not our first male guest to see her, you know. Could I have been drugged? The bitterness in the chocolate? Or had it been Miss Tilly in my room in a glow-in-the-dark costume and makeup? No, because I put my hand through that person, which was impossible, and felt ice grip my flesh and bone. What could do that? It wasn't you I saw? Some kind of projection? Sorry, no. I was sound asleep. The odd thing is, my last dream before I awoke was of a pretty man in a pretty nightgown. I was so flustered that I couldn't tell if she was pulling my leg. Speaking of which, do you have any men's clothes I could borrow? I'm afraid not, she said. I doubt anyone on the staff has any. You'll have to drive to the mall. I could lend you some stretchy leggings and a baggy t-shirt or sweater. My shoes won't fit you, I'm afraid. No, thank you. I'd rather not go shopping barefoot in your clothes. She smiled. I don't blame you. Why don't you order some things online and have them delivered here? If you just want to cover up, I have a white chenille robe that isn't too feminine. You'll have to stay here until your things arrive, but I'll comp you for the night. Do you have a cell phone? Yes. We don't have Wi-Fi, but there's cell service, Ms. Tilly said. Meanwhile, I'll lend you my robe, though I hate to cover up that darling chemise. You look so cute. While I waited in her office, I wondered if I was crazy to stay here. Would the ghost return? There was no such thing as a ghost. But I'd seen something, and wanted to find out what it was. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my room in the chemise and Miss Tilly's robe, binging on Netflix and ordering room service. I let the maid Abby into the room to tidy up. She had obviously heard about the return of Miss Tilly's ghost, and asked more questions than I wanted to answer. The ghost left you with only a chemise? Is that Miss Tilly's robe? Yes, I said, blushing. Excuse me, Mr. Laszlo, but I'd love to see the chemise. Ms. T said it was gorgeous. I opened the robe. She exclaimed at how pretty the chemise was, and how soft the cotton was, and how elaborate the pin tucks were, and how the lace was obviously handmade. I wrapped myself up in the robe again and self-consciously thanked her for the compliment. I decided not to eat the chocolate that Abby left on my pillow. Could it have been a microdose of LSD or something? I wanted a clear head in case Miss Tilly reappeared. I awoke again in the wee hours of the night. The ghostly image of Miss Sarah Tilly materialized at the foot of my bed, just as she had last night. Again she addressed me as Lisa, not Laszlo, and ordered me rather more sternly this time to get up and get dressed. I was already wearing the chemise. Dressed in what? I asked. I picked up my phone and quickly shot a few photos of the ghostly figure. She paid no attention. A young lady like you needs a corset, she said. She opened another drawer in the armoire, a drawer that was empty yesterday, and pulled out a complicated-looking foundation garment of white satin with boning, laces, and busks. The outside was ornately decorated with white lace appliques, floral embroidery, and tiny seed pearls. This was insane. Absurd. How could a body that wasn't solid handle a solid object? I touched her hand that held the corset, felt the stab of ice as my fingers sank into hers. Touched the edge of the corset, it was real. Withdrew my hand from hers, and the pain stopped. How could this possibly be? Turn around, Lisa, Miss Tilly's ghost said. I spoke to her for the first time. Why do you keep calling me Lisa? Because you're pretty enough to be a girl, she said. I'm not a girl. Why are you dressing me as one? She didn't answer. Instead, I had the remarkable experience of being laced into a corset by a ghost. The heavy satin fabric prevented her skin from touching mine. She did up the busks in front, tightened the laces through the steel grommets in back and stuffed the cups with a couple of silk scarves. The corset was tight, but not uncomfortably so. I can't explain why I raised no objections, made no effort to stop her from corseting me. I felt somehow drugged, not fully in control of my actions. I wanted to do whatever Miss Tilly told me to do. If she wanted me to wear a corset over my chemise, I would wear a corset over my chemise. She sent me back to bed, clad as I was. "Sleep now," she said, and I remembered nothing after that until morning. Tried to undo the corset, but Miss Tilly had double knotted the laces. I would need someone's help to take it off. Searched the room again, but no clothing had appeared overnight. The armoire was empty. The chemise and corset were all I had to wear. I hurried downstairs, hoping to find Miss Tilly in her office. Abby passed me on the staircase. She smiled, or was it a smirk? "Cute corset, Mr. Laszlo." I hurried on, too embarrassed to thank her for the compliment, and found Miss Tilly in her office. "Goodness gracious, Mr. Laszlo. Or should I say Miss Laszlo? Look at you." I told her what happened and showed her the photos I'd taken. I'd heard that ghosts wouldn't show up in photos, but mine showed the ghost in full detail, including its eerie glow. I asked her point blank how she created the illusion of the ghost. "We didn't create it," she said. "We can't. We don't have holograms, or laser projectors, or whatever you're thinking of. What you saw, Mr. Laszlo, was an ectoplasmic manifestation of Miss Tilly the First. Ectoplasm is an energy field created by the death of a person in the grip of extreme emotional turbulence. Most people can't see it, but those sensitive enough to detect it say it takes the form of the dead person, with a bluish glow or aura. In other words, a ghost." "Don't be ridiculous. I don't believe in ghosts." "Don't you believe your own eyes?" she said. "You saw Miss Tilly. She dressed you. You woke up in a chemise and corset, very pretty ones, I must say. Where did they come from? When did you put them on? Who laced you into your corset? Not me. I can show you my sleep profile for last night on my watch." I had no answer to that. So why is Miss Tilly the First a ghost? Her first husband was a railroad millionaire who died in a train crash. She inherited his wealth, spent 10 years building this house, and was murdered in her bedroom by jealous lover she had just refused to marry. Her ghost has haunted the house ever since. She can go months or even years without appearing, and then will fixate on one male guest and adapt him. "How do you mean, adapt?" I said. "Do you feel different when she appears?" "Well, now that I think about it, when the ghost comes, I feel strange. Not fully in control. Something inside seems to make me want to do as she says, even if it's embarrassing. Like wearing these clothes." "Maybe what you're feeling is the natural order of things, my dear," Ms. Tilly said. "Maybe your deepest self doesn't want to be in charge. Maybe you would rather obey someone stronger and wiser than you." Her words aroused erotic sensations that I did not expect, did not desire, but could not deny. I didn't think she was entirely right, but she wasn't entirely wrong either. I canceled my plans to head south on 101. I couldn't leave Miss Tilly's house. I was having the strangest and most interesting experience of my lifetime. I also was still trapped in antique women's underwear, awaiting my shipment of men's clothing from Amazon.com: jeans, a belt, a couple of shirts, some boxers, shoes, and socks. That night, Miss Tilly appeared again in a swirling blue aura, and added a new garment to the chemise and corset I already wore, knee-length muslin drawers lavished with lace, ribbons and bows and tied with a drawstring. A couple of inches of the lacy hems showed under the hem of my chemise and were almost as embarrassing as the corset itself. It seemed that the ghostly Miss, not Ms. Tilly, was changing me into feminine clothes of her era, at the rate of one new garment a night. The strange thing was that I didn't object or refuse. I found that I wanted to do whatever she told me to do, and felt good when I did. It was almost a pleasure to obey her. The next night, she added a corset cover, a sort of camisole that smoothed the lines of my chemise and corset. She also gave me a proper nightgown with long sleeves and a hem that fell almost to the floor, so that at bedtime, I could change out of the underthings I wore during the day. The night after that, she made me add a cotton petticoat to my outfit, and on the following night, a rustling taffeta underskirt. Meanwhile, my Amazon.com delivery was late. I went to the site, and to my chagrin, my account showed no record that I'd ever purchased the clothes. Had I missed a final OK button? I selected the same items and ordered them again, making sure to check the confirmation message. Dressed in the clothes Miss Tilly gave me, I snuck downstairs daily to keep the living Miss Tilly informed of the ghost's nightly manifestations and its additions to my Gilded Age undies. She did me the huge favor of canceling my room charges for the duration. "I won't make you pay while Miss Tilly is visiting you," she said. "She's bringing out your natural beauty." I didn't want to talk about my natural beauty. "Do you truly think Miss Tilly is an actual ghost, ma'am? What else can she be?" My mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother all knew of Miss Tilly the First. Saw her, talked to her. The ghost knows every detail of the house's history. She never ages. She looks real, but she's just an ectoplasmic glow that you can put your hand through. She floats above the ground. I think she can put spells on people, something like spells. Call her a ghost, call her a spirit, call her an ectoplasmic manifestation if you like, but she's real. I began to think I was losing my mind. My second Amazon.com delivery vanished into thin air, just like the first. By now Miss Tilly had me fully attired in feminine underclothing from the late Victorian era: drawers, chemise, corset, petticoats, a corset cover. I left my room only to report to Ms. Tilly. The maids started calling me Miss, not out of cruelty, but confusion. I gave up on Amazon.com, went to the website of major department store, and ordered a set of men's clothes, with overnight delivery. On succeeding nights, Miss Tilly completed my transformation into a Victorian miss. A bell-shaped cotton skirt that swished sweetly over my petticoats, and a black cotton bodice with white lace trim at the neckline and sleeves. Last came the finishing touches. Fine knit stockings and ankle boots that made a ladylike click-click-click on the hardwood floors. A wig with dark hair caught up in braids, topped by a white ruffled headband. A starched white cotton bib apron. The headband and apron turned the outfit into a maid's uniform and, though I failed to recognize it at the time, marked the moment of my descent into servitude. My order from the department store vanished into the void, like my Amazon.com orders. I found myself wondering if ectoplasmic manifestations could interfere with 5G. When Ms. Tilly saw me fully dressed, she called me into her office, inspected my clothing, makeup, and hair, retied my apron more tightly, and decided that I looked good enough to help her real maids in the kitchen and laundry. I wasn't wild about the idea, but she reminded me that I was living in her house and eating her food and should be glad to be able to contribute to the household in some small way. Which, of course, meant that I ended up doing the other maid's dirtiest, dullest chores. I scrubbed pots, polished silver, cleaned vintage Victorian flush toilets, ironed bed linens, and took out the trash. They were careful to keep me out of sight of guests, as I did not look as feminine then as I would later. Abby buoyed my spirits by telling me the staff was short-handed at the moment and that I was a big help, despite my lack of training. Miss Tilly continued to visit me by night, refining my look and teaching me ladylike manners and deportment. She taught me how to curtsy perfectly, move gracefully in long skirts, and navigate the stairs safely. I carefully avoided touching or passing through her, but every now and then an inadvertent contact would burn me like an ice-cold flame. I lost track of the days. I'd been at Miss Tilly's house for weeks. The household maids taught me a number of useful skills: dusting, sweeping, vacuuming, cooking, cleaning, washing, drying, ironing, even simple mending with a needle or sewing machine. I no longer protested having to wear feminine clothing or do traditionally feminine chores. I was enthralled to Miss Tilly, and had a healthy respect for Miss Tilly as well. I knew that they were training me in a feminine role, but I couldn't say no to them. I felt obliged, compelled, to obey. I felt a perverse pleasure in submitting to their will. Mr. Laszlo was no more. Everyone called me Lisa now. One evening, maybe a month after I arrived, Miss Tilly appeared in my room hours earlier than usual, just as I was changing out of my uniform into my nightgown, one of my favorite moments of the day. She made me change back into my chemise and redo my makeup, hair, and nails. When she was satisfied with my appearance, she told me to put on my fanciest underthings and formal black satin uniform. She inspected the result, fluffed the bow of my apron, and pronounced me ready. Ready for what, ma'am? To fulfill your destiny. Say goodbye to Laszlo. You are Lisa now. She led me downstairs, floating above the steps as I carefully lifted my skirts to avoid tripping over them. We entered a room I rarely saw, the historic family chapel. It was a Victorian Gothic fantasy in black and white marble, with stained glass windows and a groin vault ceiling. Hand-carved foliage and traceries in oak decorated the altar and 5 rows of pews. The chapel was lit only by candles, not by electricity. To my dismay, we were not alone. The living Miss Tilly stood at the far end of the chapel, by the chancel lectern in front of the altar. The 7 staff housemaids sat facing her in the first 2 rows of pews, all wearing the same black satin uniform that I did, with the same white satin apron and rustling petticoats. Faint, eerie music played, though no one sat at the organ. Floating above the marble floor, the ghost led me past the pews to the chancel, where I faced both Sarah Eunice Tillis, the living and the dead. I had my back to the maids, but was keenly aware of their eyes boring holes into me. The living Miss Tilly spoke. Lisa, I'm happy to say that you have qualified for a great honor. Miss Tilly has decided you are ready to enter her service. I formally invite you to join the staff of Miss Tilly's house as an apprentice housemaid with free room, board, and uniforms. Unpaid, of course. Do you accept? I wanted to ask 100 questions, but my cavils were overridden by an overwhelming desire to say yes. Miss Tilly's glowing eyes met mine, and I felt an irresistible urge to obey and serve her. At Miss Tilly's house, I could achieve what I now knew was my deepest desire, to submit to a strong woman. 2 strong women, actually, both with the same name. I want to accept, ma'am, but... She raised her eyebrows. But? Your other maids are all girls, and I'm not. Oh, what makes you think they're all girls? You aren't the first boy that Miss Tilly has turned into a maid. I stared at her. You mean, some of them? All of them? Abby's a boy? I thought she was the cutest and most feminine of them all. The maids tittered in the pews behind me. All of Miss Tilly's maids were born like you, Lisa, Miss Tilly said. They take hormones and, in some cases, have had minor surgery to look more feminine. Like you, they were blessed with a slender figure and delicate features. Miss Tilly appeared to each of them, coaxed them into petticoats and convinced them to enter her service, just like you. You're going to fit in so nicely here, and bring us back to full strength. You'll share a room with Abby, and soon the 2 of you will be best friends forever. Miss Tilly's ghost spoke up in her hollow, haunting voice. Answer the question, Lisa. Do you accept? Her glowing blue eyes stared into mine. I was filled anew with a desire to submit to her will, become her maid, wear the frilly uniforms, join the other maids who served Miss Tilly's house, and become BFFs with the lovely Abby. Part of my mind tried to protest. I was a man, not a maid. Why should I accept being dressed like this? Why should I accept a role as the humble servant of powerful women? I should leave this house now, return to town, resume my job, live in the real world. I supposed that I should do all those things, but in my heart, I didn't want to. I wanted to stay here. I was Lisa now, and I wanted to serve both Sarah Eunice Tillis as a corseted and petticoat maid in the Victorian dresses I had learned to accept. I made my decision, and made her my deepest curtsy. Yes, ma'am, I accept. Good girl, Miss Tilly said. Welcome to my service, Lisa, said Miss Tilly's ghost. She gave me a condescending nod and faded away. I wondered again if I was doing the right thing, abandoning my well-paid but unsatisfying job in Silicon Valley for an unpaid but deeply satisfying position as a maid in a haunted mansion. In my old life, I followed my head, always thinking and planning and plotting about how to get ahead in the corporate rat race. Since meeting Miss Tilly's ghost, I had learned to follow my heart instead, and my heart was telling me to embrace a new life in petticoats as Lisa the maid. Miss Tilly promptly took charge of the 8 maids of Miss Tilly's house, now including me. Line up by twos, girls. Abby, take Lisa's hand. We shall proceed to the maids' quarters, where we will greet Lisa properly, with hugs and kisses and cake, and maybe a round of the spanking game. Lisa! Shorter steps, please, and stand up straight. The maids sorted themselves into 4 couples holding hands. Abby took my hand and looked adoringly into my eyes. Lisa, will you be my best friend forever? I took a deep breath. Yes, Abby, I said, and accepted her kiss.